Tamika Jefferson sat in the 14th floor conference room at Carter Logistics. Glass table, leather chairs. Philadelphia skyline stretched wide behind the windows. Under her blouse on her left side a scar 4 inches long, 6 months old. The kidney it once held was now inside the man sitting across from her. She thought she was here to discuss her return schedule. Stephen Carter did not say, "Welcome back." He said, "We need to discuss your attendance record." The woman from HR beside him held a manila folder. Tamika saw it and understood before anyone said another word. There are moments when a person realizes that the thing they gave away freely has been weighed, measured, and found less valuable than a quarterly attendance report. 14 months before that conference room, Tamika Jefferson woke at 5:20 a.m. in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor of a narrow brick building in West Philadelphia. The radiator in the hallway clicked twice the way it always did when the heat came on. Keisha was still asleep in the next room, 9 years old, covers pulled up to her chin, one sock on, one sock off, the way she had slept since she was 4. Tamika moved through the kitchen without turning on the overhead light. She did not need it. She had made this walk so many times in the dark that her hands knew where the counter ended and where the cabinet began, the way a pianist knows a keyboard without looking down. She packed 2 lunches, one for Keisha, turkey and cheese on wheat, an apple, a juice box, 3 ginger snaps in a small plastic bag, one for herself, whatever was left. She set Keisha's lunch on the kitchen table next to a folded note written on a square of yellow paper. The note said, "Have a good day, baby. Quiz is going to be easy. Love, Mama." She wrote one every morning. She had been writing them since Keisha started 1st grade. She kept the pen in the same drawer next to the stove and the stack of yellow paper next to the pen, and she never once forgot, because some things are not the kind of thing you forget when they are the only conversation you get to have with your daughter before the sun comes up. Tamika was 34 years old. She had been a single mother for 9 years. Keisha's father left when Tamika was 7 months pregnant. No letter, no conversation. No child support, paid not once, not a single dollar in 9 years. She did not talk about him, not out of bitterness and not out of pain. She had simply decided a long time ago that his story did not deserve space in hers, and she had kept that decision the way she kept everything else, quietly and completely. Her mother, Denise Jefferson, lived 3 blocks east in a ground-floor apartment on Spruce Street, 61 years old. Retired after 26 years as a registered nurse at Temple University Hospital. She came to Tamika's apartment every afternoon at 3:15 to pick up Keisha from the bus stop and stay with her until Tamika got home. She did not ask to be paid. She did not ask to be thanked. She showed up at 3:15, the way the sun shows up in the morning, because that is what it does, and it does not require a reason. Tamika had worked as the executive assistant to the CEO of Carter Logistics for 7 years. She managed 47 meetings a week across 4 calendars. She processed more than 200 emails a day. She was the first person Stephen Carter called at 6:30 in the morning and the last person to send him a briefing document at 10 p.m. She knew the names of his dry cleaner and his accountant and his dentist. She knew which board members needed a call before a vote and which ones needed silence. She knew when his coffee order changed from black to decaf in March of the previous year, and she adjusted without being asked, because she had noticed the way his hands shook slightly during the 4 p.m. meetings, and she had decided it was not her place to say anything, but it was her place to act. She kept an extra lunch in her desk drawer, not for herself, for anyone who needed it. A sandwich, a granola bar, a bottle of water in a brown paper bag tucked behind her filing folders. She had started doing it in her 2nd year at the company, when she noticed that Roland Hayes, the maintenance worker on the 14th floor, sometimes went the whole day without eating because he forgot to pack lunch and could not afford the $14 salads in the lobby cafe. She never made a thing of it. She would walk past his supply closet around noon and set the bag on his cart and say, "Mr. Hayes, I made too much again." She said it the same way every time. He never believed her. He also never turned it down. Some people build their kindness loudly so the world can see it. Others build it in desk drawers and brown paper bags and small lies about making too much food, and they never once put it on a resume or mention it in a performance review because it has never occurred to them that kindness is something you are supposed to get credit for. Stephen Carter arrived at the Carter Logistics building every morning at 6 a.m. He parked in the same spot on the third level of the garage, took the elevator to the 14th floor, and walked through every department before sitting down at his own desk. He knew every employee's name, all 340 of them. He could tell you who had been late twice in the last quarter, and who had exceeded their sales target by 11%, and who had requested a transfer that he had not yet approved. He knew names the way a general knows ranks, by function, not by friendship. He was 47 years old. He had built Carter Logistics from a single used truck and a $6,000 loan he took out at 23 years old in Camden, New Jersey, where he grew up in a 2-room apartment above a laundromat with his mother Gloria. Carter. She raised him alone. She worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. She did not talk about the years before Stephen turned 5. She called them the hard years, and she left it there. And Stephen respected the silence, the way a son respects a closed door in his mother's house. He did not knock. He did not ask. He assumed that whatever was behind it was hers to keep. That silence would cost him something he could not yet imagine. But that part of the story had not arrived yet. Stephen respected Tamika Jefferson the way he respected anyone who performed at a high level, consistently, and without complaint. He trusted her judgment. He relied on her precision. He depended on her presence in ways he would not have been able to articulate because he had never tried. But his trust was transactional. It was built on output and sustained by output, and it would last exactly as long as the output lasted and not 1 day longer. In 7 years, he had never once asked her about her daughter. He did not know Keisha's name. He did not know Tamika was a single mother. He did not know about the notes on yellow paper or the extra lunches in the desk drawer, or the 3 blocks between her apartment and her mother's apartment that Denise walked every afternoon at 3:15 without fail. He knew what Tamika produced. He did not know who she was. There is a kind of respect that looks like loyalty, but is actually just accounting. It tracks what you give. It does not ask what it costs you to give it. And the moment the numbers change, the respect disappears, and the person holding the ledger does not understand why you are surprised, because in their mind, nothing personal was ever part of the arrangement. The first sign came on a Tuesday in October. Stephen canceled his 2 p.m. meeting and asked Tamika to clear the rest of his afternoon. He did not say why. She cleared it. The next week, he canceled 3 meetings. The week after that, he left at noon on a Thursday, which he had never done in the 7 years she had known him. She did not ask. She adjusted his calendar and forwarded his calls and covered the gaps the way she always had. But she noticed things. She noticed the swelling in his ankles on days when he sat too long. She noticed the color leaving his face by mid-afternoon. She noticed the way he held the edge of his desk when he stood up briefly, as if the floor had shifted slightly beneath him and he needed a second to find his balance. She noticed because noticing was what she did not just professionally but personally, the way some people are built to see what others walk past. 3 weeks later, she walked into his office at 8 a.m. and set his coffee on the desk and said, "Mr. Carter, you need to see a doctor. Today." She said it the way she said everything, without drama, without performance. As a fact that required action. He looked at her for a moment, and for the first time in 7 years, she saw something in his face that she had never seen there before. She saw fear. The diagnosis came on a Friday. Stage 4 chronic kidney disease, both kidneys failing. Dialysis 3 times a week, starting immediately 4 hours per session, a machine doing the work that his body could no longer do on its own. The nephrologist at Penn Medicine explained it to him directly. Chronic kidney disease is not sudden. It builds over years quietly, the way water erodes stone. By the time you feel it, the damage is advanced. Stage 4 means the kidneys are functioning at 15 to 29%. Stage 5 means they have stopped. The only long-term treatment is a transplant. The average wait time for a deceased donor kidney in the United States is 3 to 5 years. 13 people die every day in this country waiting for an organ that never arrives. Stephen sat in the examination room and listened. He did not interrupt. He asked one question. "How long do I have without a transplant?" The doctor said. "That depends on how your body responds to dialysis. But I would not plan in terms of years. I would plan in terms of months." His family was contacted. He had 2 brothers. The older one, Vernon, was tested. Not a match. The younger one, Curtis, refused. He said it on the phone in a single sentence. "I have my own family to think about." Stephen did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He set the phone down on his desk and sat in his office for a long time after that call, not because he was angry, but because something in the architecture of what he believed about loyalty had just cracked quietly, in a place he could not reach to repair. The news moved through Carter Logistics the way all news moves through a company of 340 people, quietly at first, then not quietly at all. Tamika knew before anyone, because she managed his calendar, and she saw the dialysis appointments appear 3 times a week: Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. Blocked out in red, recurring indefinitely. She did not say a word to anyone. She simply adjusted the rest of his schedule around those blocks and made sure no one asked why. Tamika went to the testing center alone. She did not tell Stephen. She did not tell her mother. She drove to Penn Medicine on a Saturday morning, while Keisha was at Denise's apartment, and she sat in a waiting room with fluorescent lights and beige walls, and filled out 11 pages of medical history and consent forms, and gave 6 vials of blood and answered questions from a transplant coordinator who looked at her and said, "You understand this is entirely voluntary." She said, "I understand." The results came back in 9 days. She was a match. Blood type compatible, tissue cross-match negative, kidney function excellent. She sat in her car in the hospital parking garage for 40 minutes after reading the letter. The engine was off. The windows were up. The concrete ceiling above her was low and gray, and the parking garage smelled the way all parking garages smell, like exhaust and something slightly damp. She sat there and thought about Keisha. She thought about Denise. She thought about the fact that she had one body and it contained 2 kidneys, and one of them could keep another person alive, and the question was not whether she could do it, but whether she was willing to live with not doing it. She drove to her mother's apartment that evening after putting Keisha to bed. Denise opened the door and knew immediately something was wrong because a mother's eyes work differently than everyone else's eyes. They do not see what is in front of them. They see what is underneath it. They sat at the kitchen table. Denise made tea, Tamika told her. Denise set her cup down slowly. She did not pick it up again. 26 years as a registered nurse at one of the busiest hospitals in Philadelphia had taught her exactly what a kidney donation involved. She did not need it explained. She needed her daughter to hear what she already knew. She said, "The surgery takes 3 to 4 hours. Recovery is 6 to 8 weeks, minimum. Complication rate for living donors is 20%. That includes infection, blood clots, chronic pain, and long-term risk to the remaining kidney." She said 1 in 10,000 donors dies on the table. She said, "You have a daughter. You are all she has. What happens to Keisha if something goes wrong on that table?" The room was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside on Spruce Street, a car passed slowly, its headlights sweeping across the kitchen window and then disappearing. Tamika did not answer right away. She looked at her mother's hands wrapped around the teacup that she was no longer drinking from. Hands that had held newborns and dressed wounds and gripped the side rails of hospital beds for 26 years. Hands that had held Tamika the night Keisha's father left and had not let go until Tamika stopped shaking. She said, "Mama, if I do not do this and he dies waiting, I have to live with that. Keisha has to grow up watching me live with that." Denise looked at her daughter for a long moment. She did not agree. She did not argue further. She recognized the look on Tamika's face because she had seen it before many times in the mirror on the mornings when she went to work, knowing the shift was going to be 12 hours and the patients were going to be difficult, and nobody was going to say thank you, but she was going to go anyway, because that is who she was, and it was who her daughter had become. Tamika signed the donor consent form on a Wednesday afternoon in the transplant coordinator's office at Penn Medicine. Blue pen. Neat signature in the lower right corner of the page. She signed her name the way she did everything. Carefully. Completely. Without expecting anyone to notice. She told Stephen the next morning in his office. She closed the door. She said, "I have been tested. I am a match. I would like to donate my kidney to you." Stephen Carter sat behind his desk. He did not move for a long time. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he does not have a category for, something that does not fit into any system he has built for understanding the world and the people in it. He said, "I do not know what to say." Tamika said, "You do not have to say anything. There are gifts so large that the person receiving them does not know where to put them. Not because they are ungrateful, but because they have never built a place inside themselves for something that big. And when that happens, sometimes the gift just sits there unclaimed until the person either grows enough to hold it or decides it is easier to forget it was ever given." The surgery was scheduled for a Monday in April. Tamika arrived at Penn Medicine at 5:30 a.m. The hospital smelled the way all hospitals smell at that hour, like disinfectant and recycled air, and something faintly metallic underneath both. The fluorescent lights in the pre-operative hallway buzzed at a frequency just low enough that most people stopped noticing it after a few minutes. Tamika noticed it the entire time. Keisha had come with Denise, 9 years old, standing in the hallway in her school shoes because Denise was taking her to class afterward and there had not been time to change. She held her mother's hand and did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Mama, does it hurt?" Tamika said. "Not yet, baby," Keisha said. "Will you be here when I get out of school?" Tamika said. "I will be right here." She kissed the top of her daughter's head. She breathed in the smell of her shampoo. The coconut one they bought at the drugstore on 52nd Street. The $3.99 bottle that lasted exactly 3 weeks. She held that breath longer than she needed to. Denise stood at the far end of the hallway with her arms folded across her chest. Her face was still. Her jaw was set. Her hands tucked under her arms where no one could see them were shaking. 26 years of nursing had taught her what happened behind operating room doors. She knew the sounds. She knew the timing. She knew what the silence meant when it lasted too long. She had not slept the night before. She had not told Tamika that. The anesthesiologist came at 6:15. Tamika lay on the gurney. The ceiling tiles above her were white with small gray dots. She counted 7 dots in the tile directly above her face before the sedation reached her bloodstream and the counting stopped. The surgery took 3 hours and 14 minutes. The transplant team removed her left kidney through a 4-inch incision on her left side. The organ was transported across 2 operating rooms in a sterile container and placed inside Stephen Carter's body within 41 minutes of removal. Both procedures were completed without complication. The kidney began functioning almost immediately. Stephen woke first. Tamika woke 40 minutes later. The first thing she saw was the ceiling again, different tiles, a recovery room. The second thing she saw was flowers on the table beside her bed, white and yellow. A small card tucked into the arrangement. She reached for it. The movement sent a sharp line of pain across her left side from the front of her hip to the middle of her back, and she stopped and breathed and reached again slower. The card was handwritten. Not typed, not printed. Written in blue ink in a hand she recognized because she had seen it on hundreds of memos and margin notes over 7 years. It said, "I owe you my life. I will never forget this. Stephen." 8 words. She read them twice. She set the card on her chest and closed her eyes. He came to her room 2 days later. He walked slowly. The surgery had taken something from him too, though what it gave him in return was everything. He sat on the edge of her bed. He did not sit in the chair. He sat on the bed, closed the way a person sits when the distance between 2 chairs feels like too much space for what needs to be said. He looked at her. His eyes were red. He said, "Thank you." 2 words. He said them quietly. Tamika looked at him, and for the first time in 7 years, Stephen Carter did not look like a CEO. He looked like a man who had been afraid and was not afraid anymore and did not yet know what to do with the difference. The surgeon came to Tamika's room on the third day. Dr. Owens. Calm hands. Direct eyes. She said, "The procedure went well. Your remaining kidney is functioning normally." She said recovery varies. Most living donors return to full activity in 4 to 6 weeks. Some take longer. There is no way to predict it. Listen to your body. If something does not feel right, come back. She said it the way doctors say things they have said many times before, carefully and completely, because they have learned that the patients who hear the words are not always the ones who remember them. Tamika went home on a Thursday. Denise had cleaned the apartment, fresh sheets on the bed, soup on the stove. Keisha had taped a drawing to the bedroom wall, a picture of 2 stick figures holding hands with a large red heart between them, and the words, "Get well, Mama," written in purple marker across the top. Tamika stood in the doorway of her bedroom and looked at it for a long time before she lay down. The first 2 weeks were the hardest. The pain was not dramatic. It was constant. A deep pulling ache on her left side that woke her at 3 a.m. and stayed with her through the morning and softened slightly by afternoon and returned again at night. She could not lift Keisha. She could not carry groceries. She could not stand at the stove long enough to cook a full meal without needing to sit down. Denise came every morning at 7 and stayed until 9 at night. She did not complain. She did not remind Tamika that she had warned her. She simply came and cooked and cleaned and held her granddaughter and did what mothers do when their children are hurting, which is everything silently without keeping count. In the 3rd week, Tamika developed a urinary tract infection. It is one of the most common complications following a living kidney donation. Between 15 and 20% of donors experience some form of post-surgical complication, most often infection-prolonged pain or chronic fatigue that persists for months beyond the expected recovery window. The body does not always cooperate with the timeline the mind has set for it. The infection put Tamika back in the hospital for 3 days. The bill was $4,200. Her insurance covered 70%. She paid $1,260 out of a savings account that had $2,100 left in it after 3 months without a paycheck. She lay in the hospital bed and did the math the way she always did the math. Quietly, precisely the way a person counts when every number matters, because there are no numbers behind the numbers. $840 left. Rent was $1,150. She used all 12 weeks of her leave under the Family and Medical Leave Act, the federal law that allows eligible workers to take up to 12 weeks of unpaid job-protected leave for serious medical conditions. The law protects your position. It holds your desk. It keeps your name on the directory. But it does not protect you from being judged for what happened to your body while you were away. It does not prevent a spreadsheet from recording your absence as a pattern. And it expires. On week 13, you are back, and the clock that was paused starts ticking again, and nobody is required to remember why it was paused in the first place. Tamika returned to Carter Logistics on a Monday in August, 4 months after the surgery. She arrived at 6:15 a.m., the way she always had. She sat at her desk. She opened her email. 237 unread messages. She began working through them one by one, but her body was not the same body that had left this desk 4 months earlier. By 2 p.m., the fatigue arrived like a wall. Her concentration thinned. The ache on her left side returned when she sat too long in the same position, a sharp pull along the scar line that reminded her every single time exactly what she had done and exactly where it had gone. She did not tell anyone. She adjusted. She stood up every 40 minutes and walked to the water fountain and back. She took her lunch breaks in her car with the seat reclined and her eyes closed for 20 minutes. She managed, but some days she could not manage. Some days the pain was worse, or the fatigue came earlier, or her body simply refused to perform at the level her mind demanded of it. In the first 2 months back, she called in sick 7 times. She hated every single one of those calls. She made them from her bed with her eyes on the ceiling and the phone held tight against her ear and the taste of something bitter in her mouth that was not illness. It was the feeling of needing permission to be human from a system that had not built a category for what she had done. Every morning when she dressed for work, she saw the scar, 4 inches, pale pink, now fading slowly, the way scars do when the body decides to move on, even if the person has not. She did not regret it. She had never regretted it, but she had not expected the after to last this long. Stephen Carter, during those same months, had recovered fully. His new kidney functioned without complication. He was back in the gym by month 3, running 2 miles by month 4. He posted a photograph on LinkedIn in September mid-stride on the Schuylkill River Trail, sunlight on his face, the Philadelphia skyline behind him, a caption about resilience and second chances. The photograph received 412 likes. Tamika did not see it. She was at home that evening with an ice pack pressed against her left side, helping Keisha with her math homework at the kitchen table while Denise heated soup on the stove. The card he had written from his hospital bed, the one that said "I owe you my life," sat in the top drawer of his office desk. It had been there since he returned to work. Over the weeks and months that followed, other things were placed on top of it. Quarterly reports, expansion proposals, a contract from a new distribution partner in Baltimore. The card sank to the bottom of the drawer the way a stone sinks in still water slowly without sound, until it rested beneath everything that felt more immediate. He did not move it. He did not throw it away. He simply forgot it was there. Gratitude, when it is not practiced, does not disappear. It sinks to the bottom of a drawer and stays there underneath the things that feel more urgent until the person who wrote it cannot remember what it says without opening the drawer and looking, and they never open the drawer. Because they have decided that whatever is in there is from a version of themselves that no longer applies. 3 months after the surgery, while Tameka was still on medical leave, Stephen hired a new director of human resources, Crystal Barnes, 38 years old, recruited from a staffing firm in New York. She arrived with systems and metrics and a binder full of company policies that she had memorized before her first day. She was efficient. She was precise. She believed with genuine conviction that a well-run company was a fair company, and that fairness meant applying the same standard to every employee without exception. She did not know about the kidney. Nobody told her. It was not in any file she was given. It was not in any system she could access. As far as the records showed, Tameka Jefferson was an executive assistant who had taken 12 weeks of FMLA leave for a medical procedure and had returned to work in August. In October, Crystal pulled a report, standard audit, attendance flags across all departments. One name appeared at the top of the list, Tameka Jefferson. 7 sick days in 2 months. Company policy allowed 5 per calendar year. Crystal highlighted the name. She printed the report. She walked into Stephen Carter's office on a Wednesday afternoon and placed it on his desk. She said, "We have an attendance issue on the 14th floor. Stephen looked at the paper. He saw the name. He saw the numbers. 7 days in 2 months. A pattern, a flag, a problem to be solved. He did not see the scar. He did not see the 4-inch line on the left side of the woman whose name was printed on that page. He did not think about the hospital bed, or the handwritten card, or the moment he sat on the edge of her mattress with red eyes and said thank you. He saw a number that did not meet a standard. He said, "Handle it." 2 words. He said them without looking up. He did not ask why Tameka had been absent. He did not ask what the sick days were for. He did not ask Crystal if she knew the history. He did not ask anything at all. He simply handed the problem to someone who did not have the context to understand it and went back to the expansion plan he had been reading before she walked in. The cruelest thing a person can do is not always done with cruelty. Sometimes it is done with indifference. Sometimes it is done with 2 words and a turned page, and the absolute certainty that whatever is on that page is someone else's responsibility now. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. Tameka received the calendar invite the evening before. Subject line: Performance Review. Attendees: Crystal Barnes, HR. Stephen Carter, CEO. Location: Conference Room, 14B. She read it on her phone, sitting on her bed, at 8:47 p.m. Keisha was already asleep. The apartment was quiet. Outside on the street below, a car horn sounded once, and then the neighborhood went still, the way West Philadelphia goes still on a Monday night when the working people have gone to bed because tomorrow starts early. She set her phone on the nightstand. She already knew. She did not know the specifics, but she knew the shape of what was coming, the way a person knows rain is coming before the first drop falls, from the pressure in the air, from the stillness, from the particular quality of silence that precedes. A thing that cannot be taken back. She lay in the dark for a long time. Her hand rested on the scar on her left side. Not because it hurt, because it was there. She arrived at 8:45 the next morning. She wore the gray blazer she kept for important meetings. She carried her bag over one shoulder. She walked through the lobby and past the security desk and into the elevator and pressed 14 and watched the numbers climb the way she had watched them climb every workday morning for 7 years. The doors opened. She walked to conference room 14B. The door was already open. Crystal Barnes was seated on the left side of the glass table with a manila folder in front of her. Stephen Carter was seated at the head of the table. He was looking at his phone. He did not look up when Temeka walked in. She sat down. Crystal opened the folder. She spoke clearly and precisely, the way a person speaks when they have rehearsed what they are going to say and believe every word of it. She said, "Temeka, this meeting is to address ongoing concerns regarding your attendance record. Over the past 2 months, you have accumulated 7 unscheduled absences, which exceeds our company policy of 5 sick days per calendar year. Despite a previous verbal reminder, the pattern has continued. As a result, the company has made the decision to terminate your employment, effective immediately." The room was quiet. The air conditioning hummed. 14 floors below the city moved through its Tuesday morning the way it always did, indifferent to what was happening in a glass room above it. Temeka did not interrupt. She did not object. She did not mention the kidney. She did not mention the surgery, or the scar, or the 12 weeks of unpaid leave, or the hospital bill, or the infection, or the 7 days she had spent in bed, not because she was lazy, but because her body was still recovering from giving a piece of itself to the man sitting 6 feet away from her. She did not reach for any of it. Not because she was defeated, because she had decided, somewhere between the calendar invite and this chair, that she would not use the greatest thing she had ever done as a bargaining chip to keep a job that should never have been in question. She sat still. She listened. When Crystal stopped speaking, Temeka said, "Is that all?" Crystal said yes. Temeka placed both hands on the table and stood up. The scar on her left side pulled. A small, sharp pain that ran from her hip to the base of her rib cage and then settled back down. She had felt it before. She would feel it again. It was the body's way of remembering what the mind had already accepted. She pushed her chair in. She turned toward the door. Then she stopped. She turned back. She looked at Stephen Carter. He was looking at the folder on the table. He was not looking at her. She stood there and waited. 2 seconds. 3. He looked up. Their eyes met. She did not say a word about the kidney. She did not say a word about anything. She looked at him the way a person looks at someone they once respected and have now finished respecting. It is a quiet look. There is nothing dramatic in it. No tears, no accusation, no raised voice. That is what makes it devastating. It is the look of someone who has reached the end of something and will not be coming back, and the person receiving it knows it, even if they will spend a long time pretending they do not. She walked out. She went to her desk. She opened the bottom drawer and took out a small cardboard box she had kept there for years, the kind office workers keep for the day they hope never comes. She placed the framed photograph of Keisha inside it. She placed the small, succulent plant she had kept on her desk for 3 years beside the photograph. She placed the brown paper lunch bag that was sitting in the top drawer, the one she had packed that morning for Roland Hayes, on top of everything else. She closed the box. She picked it up. Roland Hayes was standing in the hallway near the supply closet. He had been replacing a ceiling light panel. He saw her come around the corner carrying the box. He saw the way she was walking straight, steady the way she always walked, but carrying something now that was heavier than what was in her arms. He did not say anything. He stood there with the light panel in one hand and watched her walk to the elevator. He watched the doors open. He watched her step inside. He watched the doors close. He stood in the hallway for a long time after that, holding the light panel he had forgotten he was holding, looking at the elevator doors, the way a person looks at a door that has just closed on something that should never have been allowed to happen. The first thing that changes when you lose your job is not the money, it is the morning. Tamika woke at 5:20 a.m., the day after she was terminated, because her body did not know yet. It had been waking at 5:20 for 7 years, and it was not going to stop on the first day just because the reason had disappeared. She lay in bed in the dark and listened to the apartment. The radiator clicked. Keisha breathed in the next room. Outside on the street, a garbage truck moved slowly past the building, the hydraulic whine of the compactor pressing down and then silence again. She got up. She went to the kitchen. She made Keisha's lunch out of habit: turkey and cheese on wheat, an apple, a juice box. She set it on the table next to a yellow note that said, "Have a good day, baby. Love, Mama." Then she sat at the table and looked at the note and the lunch and the empty kitchen, and she understood for the first time that the routine she had built to hold her life together was now holding nothing, and she was going to have to find something else to put inside it before the structure collapsed. The COBRA letter arrived 3 days later. Under federal law, when a person loses employer-sponsored health insurance, they have the right to continue that coverage for up to 18 months by paying the full premium themselves. The law was designed as a bridge, a temporary safety net. But the cost of that bridge is the full premium that the employer and the employee used to split between them, which means the person who just lost their income is now expected to pay 3 to 4 times what they were paying before. For Tamika, the monthly premium was $780. Her savings account had $840 left in it. 1 month of insurance or 1 month of rent, not both. She set the COBRA letter on the kitchen counter and did not pick it up again. She filed for unemployment. She updated her resume. She went to 2 interviews in the first week and 3 in the second. She wore the gray blazer both times. She sat in waiting rooms with fluorescent lights, and she answered questions about her organizational skills and her attention to detail and her ability to work under pressure. And not once did anyone ask about the scar on her left side, or the reason it was there, or the fact that the last person she had worked under pressure for was currently running 5 miles on a riverfront trail with her kidney inside him. But the body kept its own schedule. The scar ached on cold mornings. The fatigue still came in the afternoons, a heaviness behind her eyes that no amount of coffee could reach. She needed follow-up appointments with the transplant team every 6 months to monitor her remaining kidney function. Without insurance, each visit cost $340 out of pocket. The blood work was another $185. She did the math, the way she always did the math, carefully, completely, without pretending. The numbers would change if she looked at them differently. Denise came every afternoon. She brought food in containers she did not ask to have returned: soup, rice, and beans, baked chicken with greens. She set them on the kitchen counter without ceremony, and she kissed Keisha on the forehead, and she sat at the table and asked Tamika about the interviews and listened to the answers, and did not once, not a single time, say the words that Tamika knew she had earned the right to say. She did not say, "I told you so." She did not say, "I warned you." She did not say, "You gave a piece of your body to a man who did not deserve it." She said nothing about any of it. She just cooked and came and stayed and loved her daughter the way she had always loved her daughter, with her hands and her presence and her absolute refusal to make the person she loved feel worse about a decision that was already costing her everything. Some people speak their love. Some people cook it and carry it 3 blocks in a plastic bag and set it on a counter and sit down. Keisha asked on a Thursday evening. She was sitting at the kitchen table drawing with markers while Tamika washed dishes. She said, "Mama, why are you not going to work anymore?" Tamika said. "I am taking a break, baby." Keisha was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Is it because of the owie on your side?" Tamika's hand stopped in the water. She did not turn around. She stood at the sink with her fingers wrapped around a plate and her eyes on the window above the faucet where the evening light was turning the glass gold. And she breathed once slowly and said, "No, baby. It is not because of that." That night, after Keisha was asleep, Tamika lay in her bed in the dark. Her hand rested on the scar on her left side. Not because it hurt, because it was there, because it had become the place her hand went when the rest of her had nowhere to go. She had given a piece of herself to keep someone alive, and the world had responded by making her smaller. She did not hate Stephen Carter. She did not have the energy for hatred. Hatred requires fuel, and she was using all of hers to stay standing, to keep the lights on, to make sure there was a lunch on the table every morning with a yellow note beside it, to make sure Keisha never once looked at her mother and saw someone who had given up. That was where everything went. There was nothing left over for anger. Roland Hayes had worked at Carter Logistics for 11 years. He was 63 years old. He maintained the 14th floor and the 13th floor, and sometimes the 12th, when the regular maintenance worker on that level called in sick, which was often. He replaced light panels and unclogged drains and fixed the door on conference room 14A that stuck every winter when the frame expanded from the heating system, and he did it all without complaint and without conversation, because Roland Hayes was not a man who talked when he could work. Instead, he knew every person in that building. Not the way Stephen Carter knew them by output and function. Roland knew them the way a person knows a neighborhood they have walked through every day for a decade. He knew who left their coffee mug in the sink and who cleaned it. He knew who held the elevator door and who pretended not to see you coming. He knew who said good morning to him and who looked through him like he was part of the wall he was repairing. Tamika Jefferson had been the first person in that building to call him Mr. Hayes. Not Roland, not Hay, not the maintenance guy, Mr. Hayes. She had done it on his first day 11 years ago when he was carrying a toolbox through the 14th floor hallway, and she had stopped him and introduced herself and said, "Mr. Hayes, welcome. If you ever need anything, I am right around the corner." He had never forgotten it. In 11 years, she was still the only person in the building who used his last name with a title in front of it. And then there were the lunches. Every Tuesday and Thursday, sometimes more, Tamika left a brown paper bag on his maintenance cart, a sandwich, a granola bar, a bottle of water. She always said the same thing. "Mr. Hayes, I made too much. Please take it." He knew she had not made too much. He knew the bag was packed separately, deliberately, with his name written on it in small letters on the fold. He took it every time because he understood what it was. It was not charity. It was care, the kind that does not announce itself and does not wait to be asked for. He had heard about the kidney. Everyone in the building had heard about the kidney. The story had moved through the pantry and the parking garage and the elevator conversations that people have when they think maintenance workers are not listening. Maintenance workers are always listening. They hear everything. They just do not have anyone who asks them what they heard. And he had watched her leave. He had stood in the hallway with a ceiling panel in his hand, and he had watched her walk to the elevator carrying a small box with a photograph and a plant and a lunch bag she had packed for him that morning, and he had said nothing, and the photographed elevator doors had closed, and he had stood there for a long time thinking about the kind of world that lets a thing like that happen and calls it company policy. Roland did not use social media. He did not own a computer. He had a phone that made calls and received calls, and that was the full extent of his relationship with technology. But he had a granddaughter, Destiny Hayes, 22 years old, a journalism student at Temple University. She came to his apartment every Sunday evening for dinner, the same apartment on Lehigh Avenue he had lived in for 19 years. And she sat at his kitchen table and ate his cooking and told him about her classes and her professors and the articles she was writing for the student paper. On the Sunday after Tamika was fired, Destiny came for dinner as usual. Roland set the plates down. He served the food. He sat across from her. He said, "Something happened at my job this week." Destiny looked up. In 19 years of Sunday dinners, her grandfather had never once started a conversation about his work. He told her the story. He told it slowly, the way he did everything, without rushing, without embellishment. He told her about Tamika, about the kidney, about the firing, about the box in the elevator and the hallway where he had stood holding a ceiling panel and watching something wrong walk out the door. Destiny set her fork down. She said, "Granddad, can I write about this?" He said, "You do not use names." She said, "I will not use names." Destiny wrote the post that night. She published it on Facebook at 11:47 p.m. It was long. It was specific. It described a logistics company in Philadelphia. It described a female employee who had donated a kidney to her CEO. It described her termination 6 months later for excessive sick days. It did not name the company. It did not name the woman or the CEO. But it contained enough detail that anyone who worked at Carter Logistics would recognize every word of it, and enough truth that anyone who did not would feel it in their chest. Some truths do not need a platform. They just need one person who refuses to look away. The post had 200 shares in the first 24 hours. By Wednesday, it had 12,000. The comments were not polite. They were not measured. They were the raw, unfiltered responses of people who had read something that confirmed what they already believed about power and loyalty and the disposability of people who give too much to systems that do not give back. People tagged their friends. They tagged news outlets. They tagged labor rights organizations and organ donation advocacy groups and anyone they thought should see what a logistics company in Philadelphia had done to a woman who had given her kidney to its CEO. A reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer saw the post on Thursday morning. Her name was not important. What was important was that she made 3 phone calls. The first was to the hospital, which declined to confirm or deny any patient information under HIPAA regulations. The second and third were to former employees of Carter Logistics. Both confirmed the story independently. Both used the same phrase without being prompted. She gave him her kidney, and he fired her for being sick. The article was published Friday morning at 6 a.m. Stephen Carter read it on his phone in his car in the parking garage at 6:32 a.m. The coffee in the cup holder beside him had gone cold. The early morning light came through the windshield at an angle that caught the dust on the dashboard. He scrolled slowly. He read the headline. He read the first paragraph. He read the sentence that said, "The kidney inside him belonged to the woman he fired." His thumbs stopped moving. The screen stayed lit. The garage was silent, except for the distant sound of a ventilation fan, somewhere above him, pushing air through a concrete building that suddenly felt smaller than it had when he pulled in. The board of directors called an emergency meeting by noon. 2 investment partners called before lunch. A distribution client in Baltimore requested a formal response before continuing contract negotiations. The company's name had not been in the original post, but it was in the article now confirmed by sources verified by the reporter, printed in the second largest newspaper in Pennsylvania. The hashtag appeared by Friday afternoon. Crystal Barnes submitted her resignation by email at 4:15 p.m. on Friday. She did not come into the office. She did not offer an explanation. She simply sent a 3-sentence email to the head of operations and logged out of her company account, and that was the last anyone at Carter Logistics heard from Crystal Barnes, the woman who had flagged an attendance report without knowing what was underneath it. The woman who had sat in a glass conference room and read a termination notice to someone whose scar she had never seen and whose story she had never been told. Tamika, at that same hour, was in her kitchen. She had spent the morning dropping Keisha at school and walking to the grocery store on 52nd Street and buying chicken thighs on sale for $3.49 a pound and rice and a bag of frozen vegetables because the fresh ones were $2 more, and $2 was $2. She was standing at the stove when her phone rang. Denise. Her mother's voice had a quality to it that Tamika recognized immediately. The particular tone Denise used when something had happened and she was not sure yet whether it was good or bad. Denise said, "Baby, Have you seen the internet today? Vanessa Odom read the article on Friday evening. She was sitting at the kitchen table in her house in Mount Airy, a quiet neighborhood in the northwest corner of Philadelphia, where the streets were lined with old oak trees and the houses had front porches that people actually sat on. She had a cup of tea in front of her. The house was quiet. Her son Darius was upstairs in his room, 19 years old, sophomore at Lincoln University, healthy, strong, alive because 12 years earlier, a 26-year-old man in Allentown, Pennsylvania had died in a car accident, and his family had said yes when the hospital asked about organ donation, and one of his kidneys had traveled 60 miles in a cooler and arrived at the hospital, where a 7-year-old boy with failing kidneys was waiting, and that kidney had given that boy 12 more years and counting. Vanessa knew what a kidney meant. She knew what it cost the person who gave it and what it gave the person who received it. She knew because every year on the anniversary of her son's transplant, she sat down and wrote a letter to the donor's family. She had never met them. She did not know their names. The letters went through the organ procurement organization Anonymous One Direction. She wrote them anyway. Every year. 12 letters. She never missed. She never would. She read the article twice. She set her phone on the table. She picked it up again and read it a third time. She was a labor attorney. She had practiced employment discrimination and wrongful termination law for 16 years in the state of Pennsylvania. She knew the statutes. She knew the precedents. She knew with the precision of someone who had spent her career inside the gaps of the legal system exactly where this case fell and exactly how far the law would and would not reach. She called Temecula the next morning. She said, "My name is Vanessa Odom. I am an employment attorney in Philadelphia. I read the article about what happened to you. I would like to meet." They met at Tamika's apartment on Sunday afternoon. Vanessa came alone. She wore no suit. She carried a single legal pad and a pen. The apartment was small and clean and warm the way apartments are warm when someone has been cooking in them all morning. Keisha was at the kitchen table doing homework. Denise was in the kitchen making tea. Tamika sat across from Vanessa at the table by the window. Vanessa said, "I want to take your case. Pro bono." Tamika looked at her for a moment. She said why Vanessa did not answer with a legal argument. She did not mention the headlines or the public interest or the strength of the claim. She said, "My son Darius is alive because someone donated a kidney 12 years ago. He was 7. He is 19 now." She paused. She said, "I know what a kidney means, and I know what it costs." The room was quiet. Denise set a cup of tea in front of Vanessa and sat down without a word. Vanessa opened her legal pad. She said, "I need to be honest with you about what we are dealing with," she explained. Under the Family and Medical Leave Act, Tamika had been entitled to 12 weeks of job-protected leave, which she had used in full. But FMLA protects the leave itself. It does not protect the employee from being terminated for attendance issues that arise after the leave has ended. There is no federal law in the United States that specifically protects living organ donors from workplace discrimination related to their recovery. Some states have enacted their own protections. New York passed a law in 2018 granting living donors up to 30 days of additional paid leave. Several other states have followed in the years since. But Pennsylvania, as of the time this story takes place, had no such law on its books. The gap was real. The gap was wide. And Tamika had fallen directly into it. Vanessa said, "The legal path is not simple, but the case is strong on the grounds of retaliation and disability discrimination under the ADA because post-surgical recovery can qualify as a temporary disability and the company failed to provide reasonable accommodation," she said, "and this case is not just about you." She looked at Tamika directly. She said, "It is about every person who has ever donated an organ and been told that their recovery made them a liability. Every person who gave something irreplaceable and was punished for the time it took their body to heal." Tamika was quiet for a long moment. She looked at Vanessa. She looked at Denise. She looked at Keisha, who had stopped writing and was watching from the kitchen table with her pencil still in her hand and her eyes wide and serious, the way children's eyes get when they understand that something important is happening even if they cannot name what it is. Tamika said, "When do we start?" Gloria Carter read the article on her tablet at 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning in her kitchen in Wilmington, Delaware. She was 72 years old. She lived alone in a small brick house on a quiet street where she had lived for 26 years since she moved from Camden after Stephen finished high school. And she decided she had earned a house with a yard and a front porch and enough distance from the old life to breathe without, remembering how hard it used to be to breathe. She read the article once. She set the tablet down. She picked it up and read it again. Then she called her son. He did not answer. She called again. He did not answer. She called a third time. This time he picked up. She did not raise her voice. She did not ask questions. She said 5 words. "Stephen, come to my house, today." She said them the way a person says something that is not a request, and both people on the line know it. He said, "Mama, I can explain." She said, "Today." And she hung up. Stephen drove to Delaware. 90 minutes on I-95. He pulled into her driveway at 1:14:00 a.m. The house looked the way it always looked. White curtains in the front window. A small garden along the walkway that Gloria tended every spring. The front door was unlocked. It was always unlocked when she was expecting him, which had not been often enough in recent years, and both of them knew it. Gloria was sitting in the living room. She was in the armchair by the window, the one she had sat in for as long as Stephen could remember. On her lap was a yellowed envelope, old, creased at the corners, the kind of envelope that has been opened and closed many times over many years and has the wear to prove it. She did not stand when he came in. She did not greet him. She looked at him the way she had always looked at him when something serious needed to be said, with her hands still and her eyes steady and her voice already waiting behind her lips for the right moment to open. She said, "Sit down." He sat. She said, "When I was 37 years old, my kidneys failed. You were too. We were still in Camden. I was in the hospital for 4 months. Your aunt took care of you while I was on dialysis. You do not remember any of this because you were too young, and I never told you because I did not see the reason to put that weight on a child." Stephen was still. He had never heard this. In 47 years his mother had never spoken about it. The hard years, the closed door he had respected by not knocking. Gloria continued, "They put me on the transplant list. The doctors told me I might not make it through the winter. My sister was not a match. My brother was not a match. Nobody in the family was." She paused. She looked at the envelope in her lap. There was a woman at our church. I did not know her well. She sat 3 rows behind us on Sundays. She heard what was happening to me through the pastor's wife. She went to the hospital on her own. She got tested on her own. She was a match. Gloria opened the envelope slowly. Inside were 2 things. A card, small, handwritten, the ink faded to a pale brown after 35 years, and a photograph. Gloria, on a hospital bed, thin, her face drawn but her eyes open and clear, holding a 2-year-old boy in her arms, Stephen. And on Gloria's left side, visible where the hospital gown had shifted, a scar, 4 inches long, in the exact same place. She set the photograph on the coffee table between them. She said her name was Shirley Ann Wells. She gave me her kidney on a Tuesday morning in March. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks after. I came home. I lived. You grew up. I raised you. I worked. I moved us here. I built this life." She looked at him. Everything that came after that Tuesday, everything happened because a woman I barely knew decided that my life was worth a piece of hers. She said I never saw her again. We moved. I lost track of her. I wrote her a letter every year for the first 10 years. I do not know if they reached her. I do not know if she is alive. She touched the card in the envelope. "This is the thank you card I wrote her from the hospital. I never sent it. I kept it because I could not find the right words, and I was afraid that whatever I wrote would not be enough. 35 years and I still have not found the right words." The room was completely silent. The clock on the wall above the bookshelf ticked. Outside, a neighbor's sprinkler hissed against a fence. Gloria looked at her son. She said, "You are alive because a woman gave me her kidney when she did not have to. I am standing here because of that. You are standing here because of that." Her voice did not waver. It did not rise. It carried the particular weight of something that has been held for 35 years and is finally being set down. She said, "And you fired a woman for doing the same thing for you." Some truths arrive quietly. Some arrive like a door closing behind you in a room you can no longer leave. Stephen looked at the photograph on the table. He looked at the scar on his mother's side in the photograph, the 4-inch line in the exact position where Tamika's scar sat on her body, the scar he had never seen because he had never looked. He had sat across from her in meetings. He had stood beside her in hallways. He had taken her kidney into his body, and never once in all the months that followed had he looked at the place where it used to be. Gloria said, "I did not raise you to be this man." He did not speak. He did not defend himself. He did not explain. There are silences that are simply the sound of a person meeting the worst version of themselves in a room with no exits and no explanations that will fit through the door. He sat in his mother's living room in Wilmington, Delaware, and he was quiet the way a man is quiet when the floor he has been standing on turns out to have been someone else's ceiling all along. The board of directors held a closed session the following Monday at 9 a.m. 7 members. Conference call. The chairman asked Stephen one question. "Is the story accurate?" Stephen said yes. The chairman said, "We are requesting your resignation effective this week." Stephen did not fight it. A man who has just been shown what he is does not argue about titles. He signed the papers on Wednesday. He cleared his office on Thursday. He left the building through the parking garage entrance, not the lobby, because the lobby had glass walls, and the glass walls faced the street, and the street had reporters. Vanessa Odom filed the lawsuit on the same Thursday. Jefferson v. Carter Logistics, Inc. Wrongful termination. Disability discrimination under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Retaliation. The filing was 18 pages. It detailed the kidney donation, the surgery, the recovery, the FMLA, leave the post-surgical complications, the 7 sick days, and the termination. It named Stephen Carter individually and Carter Logistics as an entity. The filing landed on the desks of 3 major news outlets by Friday morning because Vanessa had sent it to them personally, not for publicity, but because she understood that some cases change law and some cases change conversation, and this one had the architecture to do both. At the time of this story, there is no federal law in the United States that specifically protects living organ donors from workplace discrimination related to their post-surgical recovery. The Family and Medical Leave Act covers the initial leave. The Americans with Disabilities Act may cover the recovery period if the post-surgical condition qualifies as a temporary disability. But neither law was written with organ donors in mind, and the gap between what those laws protect and what organ donors actually experience after returning to work is wide enough for a person to fall through completely, which is exactly what happened to Tamika Jefferson. Her case became the first in Pennsylvania to directly challenge that gap, and it would not be the last. Stephen Carter sat alone in his apartment on a Friday evening. The apartment was on the 23rd floor of a building in Center City. The windows looked out over the same skyline he used to see from the 14th floor conference room. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that fills a space when there is only one person in it, and that person has recently discovered that the things they built are not the things that matter, and the things that mattered are the things they threw away. The kidney inside him was working. It had been working since the surgery. It would continue working for years, possibly decades, filtering his blood, balancing his fluids, keeping him alive the way it had kept him alive every single day. Since a woman he had fired signed a consent form with a blue pen in the lower right corner of a page. The organ did not care who gave it or who received it. It did not know about the termination or the article or the board meeting or the lawsuit. It simply worked quietly, without condition, exactly the way she had. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk. He moved the stack of papers, quarterly reports, expansion proposals, the Baltimore contract. At the very bottom, Underneath everything he found the card. White envelope. His own handwriting. He opened it. "I owe you my life. I will never forget this. Stephen," he read the words. His own words. Written 6 months ago in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and flowers. 6 months. It felt like 6 years. He held the card in his hands, and he sat there for a long time in the quiet apartment on the 23rd floor, and he did not put it back in the drawer. The case settled out of court 4 months later. The terms were confidential, but the settlement was sufficient for Tamika to stabilize her life for the next 2 years, to pay for Keisha's after-school program, to cover her medical follow-ups without choosing between a doctor's visit and the rent. But the money was not the point. The money was never the point. The point was what came after. Vanessa Odom had structured the case not only as a personal claim, but as a test of the system, and the system had noticed. 3 weeks after the settlement, the Pennsylvania State Senate Health Committee invited Tamika Jefferson to testify at a public hearing on workplace protections for living organ donors. She stood at a microphone in a room in Harrisburg with wood paneling on the walls and flags behind the committee members and a gallery full of people she did not know. Keisha sat in the front row with Denise. Keisha was wearing the shoes Tamika had bought her for the start of 4th grade, the ones with the small silver buckle that Keisha had picked out herself at the store on 52nd Street. Denise sat beside her, with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on her daughter and her back as straight as it had ever been. Tamika did not talk about pain. She did not talk about Stephen Carter. She did not talk about the scar, or the hospital, or the morning. She woke up at 5:20 and had nowhere to go. She talked about the system. She said, "I am not here because one man was ungrateful. I am here because the system allowed it. I am here because a person can give a piece of their body to save another person's life and then be punished for the time it takes their body to heal. And there is no law in this state that says that is wrong." She said, "That needs to change. Not for me, for the next person." She spoke for 11 minutes. She did not read from notes. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment, and then it was not. Tamika founded the Second Gift Foundation 6 months later, a small non-profit office space donated by a community organization in West Philadelphia, 2 rooms above a barbershop on Lancaster Avenue. The mission was specific: legal aid for living organ donors facing workplace discrimination, financial assistance for post-surgical recovery costs not covered by insurance, job placement support for donors re-entering the workforce after extended medical leave. She named it the Second Gift because the first gift was the organ. The second gift was what the donor deserved in return, not from the recipient, but from the world they had chosen to make better. On the day of the opening, Tamika stood in the front room arranging chairs for the small reception. Denise was in the back, making coffee. Keisha was taping a hand-drawn sign to the front window that said "Welcome" in purple marker, the same purple marker she had used on the Get Well drawing she taped to Tamika's bedroom wall the week after the surgery. The room smelled like fresh paint, and the coffee Denise was brewing, and the particular hopeful smell of a place that is just beginning. Roland Hayes walked through the front door at 10 a.m. He was wearing clean pants and a collared shirt, which Tamika had never seen him wear in 11 years. He stood in the doorway and looked around the room, and then he looked at her. She said, "Mr. Hayes, you do not have to do this," he said. "You fed me every Tuesday and Thursday for 4 years. I am just knocking on the door." She looked at him for a long moment. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. Some things come back, not always in the form they were given, not always from the direction you expected, but they come back. The kindness you build in desk drawers and brown paper bags and small lies about making too much food, it does not disappear. It travels. It finds a door. And one day, someone knocks. The next Tuesday morning sunlight came through the thin curtains in Tamika's apartment and landed on the kitchen table where Keisha was sitting with a box of markers and a sheet of white paper. She was drawing. She had been drawing since she woke up. The picture showed 2 figures standing in front of a small building with a sign above the door. The sign said "Second Gift" in purple letters. One figure was tall, one was short. They were holding hands. Tamika stood at the counter making coffee. The apartment smelled like the grounds she bought at the grocery store on 52nd Street, the $6.99 bag that lasted 2 weeks if she measured carefully. The mug in her hand was warm. Her left hand rested on her side on the scar the way it always did in the mornings now. Not because it hurt. It had not hurt in weeks. Because it was there. Because it had become part of the geography of her body. A line on the map of who she was and what she had chosen and what had come after. But this morning it felt different. Not heavy, not sharp, just present. The way a thing feels when you have stopped fighting it and started carrying it and have finally understood that carrying is not the same as suffering. On the kitchen shelf beside the sugar tin and the small clay pot Keisha had made in art class, there were 2 things that had not been there a month ago. A handwritten card from Vanessa Odom. It said, "You changed the conversation." Darius says, "Thank you too." And beside it a letter on official stationery, an invitation to speak at a national medical conference in Washington on the rights of living organ donors. Tamika looked at both of them, the way she looked at most things, quietly, without performance, taking them in the way a person takes, in something that has arrived after a long time of nothing arriving. Denise knocked on the door at 715. A soft knock. 2 taps, the kind of knock that does not ask whether you need anything. It already knows. Tamika opened the door. Denise stood there with a foil-covered plate and the same face she had brought to this door 1,000 times before, steady, warm, completely present. She walked in. She set the plate on the counter. She kissed Keisha on the forehead. She sat down. Nobody said anything for a moment. The coffee maker clicked off. Keisha's marker squeaked against the paper. The radiator ticked twice. Some people are remembered for what they built, some for what they earned, but the ones who stay with you really stay are the ones who gave something away when they did not have to and never once used it to make you feel small. The scar on her left side was still there. It would always be there, but it was no longer a wound. It was a record of what one person chose to do for another, and of what she chose to do for herself after. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or made you think differently about sacrifice, dignity, and the quiet cost of doing good, please subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Because the truth is, people may forget your title, your company, or how much you earned, but they never forget who showed up for them when it cost something, who gave without keeping score, and who stood tall when the world tried to make them feel small. Tamika gave without condition. Roland remembered without being asked. And in the end, the quiet goodness found its way home. Until next time, stay kind, stay steady, and never believe that what you do for others goes unnoticed. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss another story like this one. And leave a comment telling us, was Tamika's sacrifice worth it, even though the person she saved never earned it? Or is the real question not about Stephen at all, but about what it costs to be good in a world that does not always reward it? This story is a work of fiction. The characters and events are not real. However, the legal and medical details referenced in this video, including FMLA protections, organ donor complications, and the absence of federal workplace protections for living organ donors in the United States, are based on real facts as of the time of this recording. We encourage you to learn more about organ donation and to support legislation that protects those who choose to give. On a personal note, when I researched organ donor protections for this story, I was genuinely surprised to learn how little legal safety exists for people who choose to donate. Tamika is fictional, but the gap in the system is real. There are people in this country right now who have given a kidney, a piece of their liver bone marrow, and who have returned to work only to find that their recovery was treated as a performance issue rather than the consequence of an extraordinary act of generosity. That should not be legal, and in most of the country it still is. If you or someone you know has been affected by organ donation, as a donor, a recipient, or a family member, your story matters. Share it in the comments. I read every one. Until next time, be good to the people who give without asking. And never forget that the truest measure of a person is not what they do when the world is watching, but what they do when it costs them something and no one sees.